This is Viticulture, where we share conversations with makers, growers, thinkers, and doers, folks who cultivate a good life. My name is Chris Missing, and I'm a lawyer turned winemaker in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, and I'm sitting down with great people in wine and other walks of life to hear their stories, learn their lessons, and take their advice on the perfect pairing. Welcome to Viticulture, where we discuss how to live a good life. Now, ordinarily, we have our long-form interviews on a bi-weekly basis with interesting updates of what's going on in the vineyard, sort of sandwiched in between. But today, we're actually going to be doing a combination of these two different broadcasts. We're going to do a long-form interview with one of, I think, the great growers in the Finger Lakes, Jeff Moriss. We're going to get an update on what's going on with this vintage, but we're also going to be talking about Jeff because I think he has a compelling story, an interesting background, and something that will help you see that there are many paths to take in life. And sometimes you end up places you didn't expect when you started your journeys. So thanks so much for being here with us, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Chris.
And I will say that this is our first remote recording. This is our first sort of field trip for the Viticulture podcast. And it's a place that feels like a bit of a homecoming because you and I have sat at this table for a decade talking about grapes, what's going on in the vineyards, getting updates, and making videos for our former brand, Belangelo, and now Mystic Cellars over the years. So if anybody wants to go back to YouTube, they can see what both of us look like as younger men.
That's right. That's right. Hopefully we're aging well.
I think so. You more than me.
I don't think so.
But what I wanted to do was start with a 30,000-foot view of growing grapes in the Finger Lakes. I want to go right into talking about how this year is and how it's comparing to previous years. And then I want to go into your story, Jeff. I want to hear more about what you were doing before you bought the farm and your adventures throughout Europe in a high-tech industry. So this farm here, Glenora Farms, why don't you tell us more about it?
Well, the background of the farm is we have about 340 acres, and historically we were doing about 150 of tillable ground, corn, wheat, rye, and soybeans, alongside our main business, which is the wine grape business, of which we have 120 acres of wine grapes. That's broken out to approximately 65 acres of vinifera grapes, about 8 acres of natives, and the remainder being hybrids. We also had quite an assortment of tree fruit and berries during the early days. We had apples, cherries, both sweet and tart. We had raspberries, blueberries, strawberries, and then we had in the stone fruit also peaches and apricots and nectarines. But as time went on, we learned that we were better served, really narrowing our focus on, particularly in the wine grape business, as things changed from the 90s into the 2000, and quality expectations kept increasing, and I'd say the knowledge of how to manage both grow tender fruit in the cool climate, and also from a winemaker's point of view, how to handle the different varieties in this environment. And probably the trickiest part is that Mother Nature here can be quite variable.
Yeah.
And in fact, every year is kind of a different story as far as the climate and weather conditions that we have to go through the process, which uniquely always ends up with quite nice vintages and sometimes uniquely different from the year before. And so it's I think, been a collaborative event between the growers and the winemakers that has allowed us to continue to improve, and at this point, making world-class wines that we believe, particularly in the aromatic whites.
Yep. Now, you grow a lot of different fruit, and you have, as you mentioned, been reseeding on some of the tree fruits, stone fruits. One of my favorite things to do every year, though, with my wife, is to come with our children and pick cherries. And this year was no exception. After a couple years of really almost no cherry crop, it was great to get back out there. They are among the best cherries I've ever tasted. So hopefully those trees will stay right where they are.
Well, a good story there is that you're absolutely right. We've had 2 years in a row with zero crop.
Yeah.
1 year, the failure was due to a spring frost, and therefore we had no bloom. And then another year was right before harvest started, we had excessive rain, and they all split.
Yep.
So we did have a talk with the trees this winter when it came time to decide to prune them. And we said, this year you're producing or you're out.
Yep.
And they must have listened. We had one of our best harvests. Quality was great. The fruit was wonderful. And we were blessed with about 3 weeks of good weather so we could continue to go through the various varieties as they ripened. And so they have reprieve, and they're good for another year at least.
Great. That's great. So aside from that, one of the things I want to hone in on, Jeff, is that you have among the oldest vinifera plantings on your farm on Seneca Lake. Let's share a little bit of the background of that story, how those were here, because they predate your ownership.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, Eastman Beers is really one of the early founders. I know that everybody knows some of the bigger names like Fournier, a Gold Seal, and Dr. Frank, Constantine Frank from Dr. Frank Vineyards, and the third and fourth generation people that are on the farm now. But Eastman Beers was a 125-year farm in the same family, and he had moved from blackberries. Dundee was the capital of the blackberry industry because that's where they would send them down to the city. That's what is used in the garment industry for dye.
It's funny, not to interrupt, but I've always wondered why we had so many sporadic blackberry plants throughout some of the properties we have, and that's probably got to be part of it.
Oh yeah, all these areas was massive blackberry farms. They used to load them down at the where the railroad tracks go by below the Pinot Blanc there.
Yep.
And put them in 55-gallon drums, and the train would come by, and it all would go down to the city, and that's before all the dyes used in that industry were natural at the time.
Yeah.
So obviously things transitioned, and he was an early active he's a Cornell guy and very active with Cornell research, and put some of the earliest dwarf trees in, like all our apples are on wire, and espalier, which is they're trained just like grapes.
Yep.
Again, a pioneer in some of the new technologies, and was a pioneer in learning how to graft and cultivate the early European varieties, particularly the Chardonnay and the Riesling. Those are our earliest blocks. Eastman Beers, along with Jim Hazlitt and Vincent Johnny's father, they came together and got cuttings from the Gold Seal vineyard, which is some of the earliest, if not the earliest, vinifera that was planted, and grafted them here on the farm, and split up the nursery stock, and was planted in the various farms. And so those were planted in mid-'70s.
Yeah. And
there's about 7 acres of Riesling and about 2 acres of Chardonnay that, obviously have dates very early into the transition of the Finger Lakes into this European varieties. And it was pre-clone, so it wasn't like we knew what or had clonage So it's been since labeled, the Riesling has been labeled the Glenora clone.
Yeah.
And it seems to have some of its own unique characteristics. Obviously, some has to do with the parentage, but a lot has to do with our unique soils, which are glacier till, a significant amount of Howard, which is a gravelly loam, and relatively shallow, a lot of shale, which gives us that mineral tones that are, along with some nice flavoroids of apricot and nectarine.
And it's interesting because you could tell they were taking what they thought was a big risk planting, especially that Chardonnay here in the Finger Lakes, because it's one of these parts of your farm that is absolutely closest to the lake. And you just don't see vines like this in the Finger Lakes yet. I mean, some of these trunks are massive, and the wine that is made from them is wonderful. We've done both sparkling and still Chardonnay, and I've worked with a lot of Chardonnay in the Finger Lakes, and it is some exceptional fruit.
Yeah, we're very fortunate. Obviously, it was a unique experiment, and again, Eastman Beers was an innovator and a forward thinker, and then of course that farm grew, and in the early 90s, 91, I believe we bought our first piece from Eastman, and then we ended up buying 2 or 3, and ultimately his whole farm. And then we had a total of 8 acquisitions, mostly in the early 90s, some spread into the mid 90s. We're just very fortunate that these properties came up, and they're all contiguous.
Yeah.
And so the farm grew to the point where we are now.
Yep. It's funny because there are oftentimes I'll just go through like Google image search, and you type in Finger Lakes, and there are some iconic photographs that come up. Among those are always pictures of your farm from Route 14, looking east down the vineyards, through the lake over to Sawmill Creek and Hazlitt Farms. And it's just a special place. You've got to wake up every morning, and even walking outside the farm office here, it's just so gorgeous.
Yeah, it's interesting to say that. As far as the photographs go, we always get a kick particularly during crush, and we have the fall leaves, etc. I mean, we've been told that one yellow barn on 14 is one of the most photographed barns in Yates County, and clearly by the number of cars that stop and are taking those shots of our vineyards overlooking the lake, it shows up in a lot of different places. It was in Wall Street by who's the wine writer, Teague.
Exactly.
Yeah, yep. She took a shot from there, and when she did a Finger Lakes article, etc. So it's an iconic view, and no, we never get. We appreciate it. We live right on the lake, right below the farm. The farm goes right to the lake in 2 different areas.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Finger Lakes is still way underdiscovered, and it's amazing how many people would show up here from the metropolitans, not that far away. New York, Baltimore, Philadelphia.
Yep.
What, 4.5 hours away?
Yeah.
And they're going, I can't believe I've never been here before.
Yeah.
I can't believe how gorgeous it is.
It is.
Or if you say somebody, and you being a California boy, right, would say, oh, I'm in the Finger Lakes, they go, where's that?
Well, when I first told my friends and law partners that I was going to be leaving to go make wine in New York, most of them said, what? We're in California. Why aren't you making wine here? But I had seen it. I'd been here. I'd fallen in love, and I realized that there was something here that you just don't get anywhere else in the country. So it made sense to me. And the more of them that come and visit, the more it makes sense to them too.
Yeah. And when you said in New York, I assume they thought you were going to the city anyways, because that's the only thing they know.
It's the general assumption. Yep. So let's talk a little bit about grape growing in the Finger Lakes. Let's talk about this year, and then let's talk about sort of the general patterns. This year started off really promising, has given us some frustrations. For the podcast, I've been tracking growing degree days. And I'd say that by mid-June, even coming into July, we were significantly ahead of past years. And we saw that in the vineyards. Vineyards felt like they were a week, 2 weeks, in some parts 3 weeks ahead of what had been typical. We are now at a point with growing degree days actually below whatever average is. We've gone through this period of a lot of moisture, but things are starting to look up. So far, what do you think 2021 has delivered?
Well, you're correct. I mean, we started out early. We had a warm spring, a hot June. I mean, we had
really hot
record number of 90-plus days. Our number is similar to yours, 7 to 10 days, based on the development of the fruit. Our prime examples are first bloom of various varieties, post bloom. We looked at pea size, and another important physiological is the bunch closure.
Yep.
We were still ahead. I was still on that 7-day right up through bunch closure. And then we've got this moisture and a bit of a cooling, particularly lately, cooler nights. So I, of late, in the letter I just sent out, which you'll be receiving, we're kind of predicting now a more traditional harvest dates. We think twofold, looking forward at the weather forecast, but also the crop size being bigger. It's going to take a little bit more time to ripen it. So we're fortunate that we got an early start.
Yeah.
We're fortunate we got a leg up. And, so I would say that this year is unique in the fact that we had that early warmth.
Yep.
Not so unusual to get a wet period. I'd much rather have it now than in August, or for surely not in September and October for harvest. So even with this rain we got over the weekend, it was, it's been very spotty.
Yep.
We did get quite a bit of rain here, but it seems to have absorbed nicely, and we're going to be right back in the vineyards this afternoon and another spray round starting tomorrow.
Yep.
So I think that there's a lot of positives here. We've got good early start. We've carried that. I guess you're right, and from maybe to an average, but we have a good outlook the next, all you can count is the next week.
Exactly.
So we're back in the 80s. I think, quality-wise, we have the potential to be an excellent vintage. We've got a long ways to go. Quantity-wise, we're above average yields and almost across the board. So we've had to do a lot because of the really an amazing growing. I mean, look at your lawn, look at the, everything, your flowers, everything has just been very vigorous. Yeah. Squash.
Yep.
Yeah. So, that's required a significant sprint, as we've called it, because of the tightening and the loss of work days based on development early on to really manage the canopy. That's what it's really about, right? Yep. It's all about how do we make sure that we have our canopy properly in control and balanced. And primarily that has to do with, number one, going out there and being diligent and timely with shoot positioning.
Yep.
The window's very short when it's growing that rapidly to do it so that you have a nice, upright, two-dimensional canopy. That's really what we're headed for, two-dimensional canopy. And then following up very quickly with the leaf pulling. We do mechanical leaf pulling because your window goes from when you get your wires up and as soon as bloom is over to there's your starting date. And once the berries soften is your end date.
Yep.
And that we moved very quickly through that transition. But fortunately, we have a new machine on a new tractor, which is a cab tractor, which allows Earl, who that's one of the jobs he does almost uniquely, and to be able to put many hours in. And we were able to actually double pull both sides of all the sensitive varieties, i.e. Chardonnay, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Noir, Pinot Blanc. Riesling got a single pull and we were able to be aggressive enough that we get that nice 60-40 light versus shade.
Yep.
With that success, then following right behind that with the summer pruning, we have our fruit nicely exposed but properly balanced with foliage, and we're able to, most importantly, get good light inception, good airflow to manage the drying, which is what it's all about.
Yep. Making
sure we can dry the canopy as quickly as possible based on what Mother Nature throws us, either dew in the morning or rain events. And then thirdly, the spray program, then you can actually, put the spray in contact with the fruit, which is what it's all about.
Yep.
So that's really been the emphasis. And like you said, what does Mother Nature do? It gives you a new change every morning as to what you got to do based on what happened in the last 24 hours. And that's growing grapes in the Finger Lakes.
It is. The couple things just to point out. We started this year in sort of a drought situation coming into January. Mm-hmm. And so we're in that unique position where even though we have had some rain, the water table isn't very high. And so we're able to get some good drainage. Most of us have drain tiles, so we're able to get back into the vineyard fairly quickly to take care of any problems that arise. The second, with regards to temperatures, I was looking back, and over the last decade, there have only been 3 years that are now reflecting this sort of coolness. So that would be 19, 17, and 14. And aside from an absolutely excessive crop in 17 that surprised a lot of us, those are still some of my favorite vintages. Those make these real classic, fresh Finger Lakes wines with tons of aging potential. So I'm with you. I think that this vintage is on track to be a real sort of iconic style of Finger Lakes wines. I think, as long as we can hopefully keep the skies a little drier, mm-hmm. we'll be in great shape. I want to bring up one other thing. When you talk about passing and leaf pulling, you mentioned one pass with Riesling. I think for me, I like Rieslings that develop some of what we call TDN, that petrol kerosene note, but I like that in time, like years and years down the line. And what we've found over the last 10 years is if you pull too many leaves, if you expose too much of Riesling to the sun, you develop more of those precursors for TDN, and you get some of that premature aging. In the Finger Lakes, our wines will age for a long time. So, managing the canopy is important. Is that one of the reasons you're looking at that, Jeff, or are there other reasons why only kind of one pass of the Riesling?
Well, some is logistics. Okay, logistics meaning that within that time frame and window of opportunity, you typically can't get it all done because you can't pull wet leaves. Yeah. The mechanical machine does not work on wet leaves. It's got to be a dry canopy. So, and that's the other corollary to what we were saying before about this window of opportunity. But the other reason is that we were able to go in when we did the. So, as you know, Riesling are one of the later ripening varieties, which means the berries themselves are some of the latest to become soft, which is a limiting factor because you bruise. So your onion knows what happens is you're actually the machine is actually touching the outsides of clusters, so you can bruise some grapes, which a little bruising is not a problem, but you don't want it to be excessive. But because of the fact that they were so firm, we could be more aggressive. By that I mean is the controlling factor, or one of the key factors that controls how many leaves you can pull, is how much pressure you can put on the canopy with the machine. Because the more you force it into the canopy, the more aggressive it is. Yeah. So we were able to be quite aggressive on the single pull, and I had exactly the kind of canopy leaf to light, shade to light ratio. So I didn't need to do the other side, to tell you the honest truth. Now, the other part of that is different varieties. You take a Gewürztraminer vineyard. They have very short nodes. That's the distance, of course, between the buds. And they have very small leaves. and they make a very compact canopy.
Yeah.
So you need to go two sides in many growing, and particularly aggressive, vigorous growing years like this.
Yep.
So there's why we had that. And then you take things like Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, which are even more sensitive to particularly powdery mildew, which is the one we're most concerned about at this stage. So we just wanted to make sure we were wide open. And also botrytis. I mean, to be honest with you, know some of the early symptoms. It's a moisture issue also. And if you need to go in there and do some protection, you want to be able to make sure you've got good fruit exposure. So those are primarily why there was a one pass on Riesling and a double pass. Many years, like last year, there was a very light one pass because we were in a drought.
Yeah.
We didn't have an excessive canopy. There was no need to take excessive leaves to get the balance you're looking for. So again, it's a function of what Mother Nature throws us as to what our decision. So nothing is ever done repetitively, meaning we're going to do it this way and that's the way we always do it. It's based on what the vine is telling us.
Yep. So oftentimes folks who write about wine love to see hot vintages, and they characterize these hot, dry vintages as the absolute best. We know that they can make really compelling wines, but there are so many other factors involved with that above and beyond the farming. 16 was a year where we had a lot of drought, and the heat didn't help us very much. What I think would be interesting is I'm going to reflect on something you told me. 2012, we're walking the vineyards. We are not only looking at early bud break, but a lot of great warmth with adequate water. We're like 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead, it felt like at times. And I remember I was still new in a lot of ways to this, and I said, boy, is this normal, Jeff? And you said, it's the Finger Lakes. There is no normal. There's an average because there are numbers, but there's no normal. For viewers and people who enjoy Finger Lakes wines, I was wondering if we could just do a quick exercise because you've got so much experience with this. And that is just, we're going to look back 10 years. I'm going to say the vintage, and you just say like your one word or one sentence summary of what that vintage was to you.
Oh, you're going to test me. Okay.
So 2011.
2011. Let's see. I don't have the numbers ahead of me. I've got great weather numbers based on temperatures and growing degree days. So that's testing me.
I guess just more of an instinct. Like, what do you remember that year being?
Well, I'll tell you, if you want to go way back, 2002 is the best red vintage we ever had.
Great.
In fact, we actually bought a barrel from one of our growers.
Yeah.
From one of our customers, wineries. So it was a full barrel. It was so good. I think that's about 25 cases or something. Yeah, and tell you the truth, it held up well up until 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So it was 17, 18 years. But I think before we jump into this test, the other thing you got to remember is that, you brought up a good point. You can have tremendous amount of growing degree days, but if you don't have a plant that's able to continue to absorb water and develop, it'll shut down. Yep. Which is what you're referring to that year. And the other thing is that so you can get all the heat you want, but if you need all the right growing conditions. And secondly, really, you take it's a difference between are you looking to maximize your reds or your aromatic whites. Yep. And we all know that the aromatic whites, which is more traditionally, I would say most. I'd say it's our best groups of varieties. Our climate is probably best suited. Mm-hmm. We can produce a world-class aromatic whites every year. Yeah. The reds, Cab Franc, because of its early ripening, I think is fitting our microclimate quite well. It gets a little more difficult if you're trying to do a Cab Sauv, for instance. But the reality is that, it's amazing. It's amazing how we've all learned to be able to manage the variability of our climate and then still create annually great wines.
Yeah.
So go ahead, hit me with another year. Let's see, 12.
Yep.
You got any numbers there?
I don't have a number on 12. I guess more what I'm thinking of is people who maybe weren't drinking our wines then, or folks from around the country or world. Just this sense of 12. So we'll just go. 12 was really warm and dry, early bud break, but excellent precipitation when we needed it.
Right.
Not so much that it would put pressure in the vineyard, but enough that the vines were getting all the water they needed to produce photosynthesis and not start to shut down and try and preserve those carbohydrates.
Right. Yeah, 12 was a good year. The big thing about 12 and before that, we had come off some very cold, we had the frost, or winter kill, in 05 and 04. So we had 2 years of really renovation of the vineyard. I mean, we lost a tremendous amount of vines. So we were back into what I would say full production then. There was a lot of replanting, some pulling that were so bad, and some varieties that we realized we weren't going to be successful with, that we moved on from, or some that we just reduced. Like a good example is we had quite a bit of Cab Sauv, and we still have some, but we reduced that and went to the Cab Franc.
Yep.
So, really in our world here, we really look 5 years, where we're really looking to say, okay, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, probably more like 17, 18, 19, 20, and now 21 is where, if you look at my records when I go out and I look at different things, I'm only looking 5 years back because other things change. But, I think our nutrients, which is really what it's all about, soil nutrients, we're total believers in managing soil nutrients. We don't feed our grapes foliage. That's why they have roots.
Yep.
And so we're careful to make sure we have a nice nutrient balance and what we're looking for. Careful not to be with nitrate, but we have a maintenance program basically, unless we have either a light year like last year, which we cut back because obviously we had less nitrogen pull, or a big year you add more for next year because they had significant tonnage. So, and the potassium, the potassium goes in the bank.
Yep.
So it lasts much longer. It's a cation that doesn't transfer as easily as nitrogen, and we usually put our boron and our minors in with our potassium, which is a fall application. I kind of got off the subject there, though.
No, that's okay. But it does tie into another aspect that I think is important, and we don't have to continue with the quiz. I've written up all these vintage summaries, so we'll check back with that.
Okay.
A lot of the ways that you ensure the vines receive the nutrients that they need is through vineyard floor management.
Right.
Cover crops.
Right.
And you'll make your decisions between planting something like clover, maybe mustard, legumes in general, to increase nitrogen where you need it, or things like wheat. So I'd love to hear some of your philosophy on how important vineyard floor management is and what your goal is.
Right. Well, it's changed because our historical move was we would plant rye, cereal rye, every other row. And then swap every year, which means you have to go out and till. So what, historically up until probably the last 3 or 4 years, the one thing that if there's something changing within our environment, our climate, is that our rain seems to come heavier when we do get it. And we started finding that, two important things. So when you do a cover crop of rye in row middle, it requires you in August to go out there and kill off that row, and then you come back and you cultivate it, primarily using offset discs and other tools, and then we would go and plant rye, and you'd get your rye in late August, and then hope you get a good growing season before you harvest, because then you're going to start mudding it up if you got to get in there before the floor gets the cover crop coming. So what happened over that same period of time, this is the last 10 years, is that we've gone to significantly more mechanization. We used to do all leaf pulling by hand. Mm-hmm. We used to do summer pruning by hand. So we've gone to 3-row sprayers. But what it says is that all these precision mechanical processes require you to have a flat floor. Mm-hmm. Because any jostling, you can quickly put a summer pruner into the vineyard, which is disastrous. Cut wires, cut posts, cut vines, or the leaf puller is same thing. I mean, you're talking a variation of an inch can change how many leaves you pull. Yep. So with the other problem with some more frequent, not that we're getting more rain, but sometimes heavier rains. Mm-hmm. We were having trouble getting the proper floor for harvest, and we were out there in the mud. So we really had to make a transition, and we did. We made a transition to primarily sod and getting all our nutrients through, calcium aluminum nitrate or potassium, potash, mm-hmm. or these kind of things. So we found that what we do now is we aerate. So aeration is a machine that goes out and pokes hole in the soil to break up the compaction from driving it over all the time, and it does allow for nutrients and other things to actually find its way down into the soil, so it's not washed off. So our sustainability has gone to more of an aeration process than it is to go to tillage and planting a cover crop, which in our case was typical cereal rye. Yep. So we still do spread some, roll out some mulch. Be honest with you, that's a function of availability. Years like last year, you couldn't afford it. So we're still doing that process when needed. But, it's the same old story is you got to keep changing to make improvements. Doing the same thing all the time ends up with the same result, right?
That's right. One of the things that has forced kind of the mechanization is an absence of labor.
Absolutely.
Well. Your thoughts on what we're facing as a quandary, maybe how we can get more young people interested in farming?
Well, I think the problem is getting worse because I think the young people have less interested in that kind of profession. It's unfortunate. I mean, I find it invigorating. It's work, but you feel good at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Oh no, our problem is, and it's even moved over to the documented labor force. Mm-hmm. I mean, they've become scarce. Essentially, what's happened is that there's such a labor shortage right now that they've been pulled from the fields, and you can't compete with them pouring concrete or something like that because mm-hmm. the construction industry will pay for significantly more than we can afford. So. I don't know where this is going to go, but everybody I've talked to, not just in the agriculture, but the hospitality across the board, and this with the pandemic and some of the social programs that seems to make it difficult to compete with the government has only made it worse.
Yeah, it's been challenging, and I mean, trying to manage a farm as large as yours, you need to turn to modern tools to make sure you can get the job done, because otherwise, if the job isn't getting done, quality is going down. And you've always put such an emphasis on the fact that you are a premium grape grower, Jeff. And I mentioned in the introduction some of the top-rated wines from the Finger Lakes. That's all fruit you've grown. So it's a challenge that we've all got to keep our eyes on in the next couple of years, and we do need to find ways to get younger people to understand not just how important farming is, but it's enjoyable. Like, you can make a great life doing this. You get to work with your hands and be outside, and there's a sense of fulfillment at the end of the day that I've never gotten in any other career. So,
It's interesting that job satisfaction is what it comes down to, and what's concerning, I mean, we have 2 children, a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they do help on the farm in the morning. But I think the problem that I see is with all this social media and screen time, the instant gratification with no effort. And therefore, they're missing the true job satisfaction that you get from job well done. That's my concern, that you don't see them as active, tinkering, making dirt bikes or working on dirt bikes or working on go-karts and all the things we used to play around with, or bicycles and stuff. Not that they don't ride and do those things, but they don't seem to be doing the mechanical side of it as much as we all did. So, I think that there's a lot to be said about how we're going to get this younger generation involved in agriculture. And as you well know, if you look at the community of growers, there's not many young ones here in the Finger Lakes. So, that's always a concern.
You are one of the youngest men when you walk into the room for those grower meetings. It's in, so a couple things about that. I agree. There is an instant gratification that comes from player level up, from swiping through social media, from the dopamine hit of that next YouTube video you didn't know you wanted to watch, but it's, scratching that itch. And in the process, we all fall into this in some way, but we aren't developing the skills to make us better people. It is developing those skills that help us find like true happiness, not just momentary joy or, again, that dopamine hit. And I grew up with a father who was a plumber in construction, can build anything, can fix anything. And I grew up in that time where, I didn't work with my hands. And I just assumed because I grew up not doing those things that I couldn't do those things. But being in a situation where, as glamorous as making wine sounds, like you've got to be a bit of a mechanic. You at least have to know when to listen to when a machine isn't running right and know you've got to take some action, even if that's calling somebody else. I began to realize how much of my life I had missed out on. So I guess I bring these things up only as a message to young people. Like, this is part of that soul satisfaction. We're in a society today where we feel like we aren't actually really happy. Everybody feels like they're missing something. Those holes can be filled by learning these skills in a way, because you feel more confident and you feel better about yourself. So talking about being confident, learning about yourself, and learning new things, Jeff, let's talk a little bit about your background, because we mentioned that yellow barn, that famous yellow barn that's been in the Wall Street Journal. That is one of the things that first attracted you, but you had a full life before that.
That's right. I was, the funny thing about that, going back to what's going to attract people, I always liked growing stuff. My family, we lived in the classic suburbs, with the houses lined right up, but we always had a garden. Yep. And my grandparents lived in a rural environment, not actually far from here. And he was a dairy farmer, so there was some blood there. But I grew up in the suburbs with Mom being a teacher and Dad working for Kodak in Rochester, very typical. But I always liked messing around in the garden and helping in the garden, so I guess I had a drive there. And then when I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I wasn't prepared to go to college. So I went to work for a farmer in the town of Mendon. And he rented us, myself and 2 other guys, 2 of which worked for him, one of the tenant houses he had up on a hill. And he really wanted to have somebody there because he had machinery in barns and it was kind of remote. So he basically gave that place to us. And so I worked for him for a year, but realized after farming and being a laborer for him, I enjoyed it, but I knew I needed to find something a little more cerebral. And so I ended up applying to college and getting my undergraduate degree in ceramic engineering, material science from Alfred University, and then going on and getting my master's, and in fact, working on my PhD. But at that point, I was a full-time employee of the school, and I was a research associate for the Alfred University Research Foundation. And in that process, I developed some technology in porous medias, porous ceramics, particularly high-temperature ceramic materials made from zirconias, partially stabilized zirconias, yttria-stabilized, mag-stabilized zirconias, high-purity aluminas, so some YAGs, yttria aluminum garnets, and things like that. And ultimately, I found an application that was pretty much a major change as far as in metallurgy, the ability to filter molten metal, high-temperature molten metals, particularly. These would be superalloys for the aerospace industry, and it then passed through all areas of metals, anywhere from stainless steel down to cast irons, etc. But it all started in the aerospace industry and with the military. And I started a company called High Tech Ceramics when I was about 29.
What year was that?
I think I started in 1981.
Okay.
I just had the 40th anniversary.
Fantastic.
We took the kids there. Same two plants that I built in Alfred Station. They're still doing well. The classic is, of course, my kids are old enough now to appreciate the tours and see the tech that I had developed, and it was all the same furnaces, same basic manufacturing that I had to develop with obviously a good team of engineers and scientists. And the classic line was when we leave, it says, "And you sold that to be a farmer?" Basically, long and short, I started the company in 81 and built it to a world sales. We were about 60% sales in offshore to the aerospace industry, and then moved into the full foundry industry worldwide in the steel industry. We had 120 employees. I think I have 6 or 7 patents in that technology, and basically I ended up selling it twice, and buying it twice and selling it 3 times. And the last time I sold it was in 1995, and because I became full-time farming in 96. So I transitioned into that. I was a part-time ceramic material science, running their research forum, the latest owner, and which was throughout the world, and was full bore in the farm that I had mentioned. Bought all this property primarily in the early 90s, and now it was up and running, and I had got myself into quite a process.
Was there something that attracted you specifically to wine growing, or was it agriculture in general, Jeff?
Well, I'll tell you, it's odd, and I don't know why, but I've been with Lori for 30 years, my wife, and I guess 31 coming up, and she remembers me saying a long time ago, I always wanted to farm on the lake.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why. I grew up in Rondequoit, and there were some farms. I used to hunt out along in the outside of Hamlin and out that way when I was a youngster, and there was apple farms that came right up to Lake Ontario. I don't know if that was the motivation, but for some reason. And so, having a house here on the lake and a cottage, and then all of a sudden some property coming up that was available here on the lake. I guess that was the initiation. I'm not sure if that was the question, though.
So it's actually kind of twofold. One, here you are, traveling the world, running a company. It's this, it's the 80s and 90s. It's the combination of corporate America and tech. And then you totally change your career.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it is, one, was wine grapes something you wanted to do? Was there something about wine that you wanted? And then 2, that decision to change your life, because you've now been farming longer than you ran High Tech Ceramics.
That's right. It's our 26th or 27th harvest.
Yeah.
So, The interesting part of that is that, I probably transitioned out of the thing that was burning me out on the tech world is travel.
Yeah.
I was traveling significantly. I had an operation. We had a distribution and sales operation in Germany. I had salespeople throughout Europe, and then of course reps in Korea and Australia and Japan, and that was when the travel was getting to be like the bus, and so the travel was probably the biggest downside of the business. So we were growing, and I was setting the example because I expected all our folks, particularly in the upper echelon, to be, being road warriors when necessary. But the wine side came from, as you know, when I first would transfer from the cottage back to the plants, the business, about an hour and 10 commute to Alfred. Drive by this yellow barn here, and it had been for sale for a while, and I bought it because I loved the yellow barn.
Yeah. And
it came with 120 acres, right? And on that 120 acres was 13 acres of vineyards. It was just Cayugas and Auroras, and there was peaches, and there was apples. Okay, my background was tillable, cash crops as they're called, and so I really got to learn about it because obviously I leased it back to the previous owner and got to know their farm manager, who is still with me, and Earl. And he kind of, I would just listen to him and got to learn a little bit more about the flip side of the tree fruit and the stone fruit and the vineyards. And of course, this was starting to become a kind of a renaissance at that time in the vineyard world and in the wine grape world, and there was the Farm Winery Act, which was 76. So, it took quite a while, but that momentum was starting to pick up. And the combination of all those things, and reality is that these deals were coming up and I was buying them, and all of a sudden I had my hands full. And it was one or the other. I wasn't going to be able to do both at the rate I was, and not do either one of them well. And so I wanted to be outside.
Yeah.
I was been inside for years, and I always looked out the windows and knew where I wanted to be. I wanted to be outside, and it was time to change. So travel is minimal. Get up, you're on the farm, go to the barn, go home for lunch. Since we've had kids, that's been great. I'm around the kids a lot. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of the driving factor of the transition. It was quite a ride. I mean, high tech was a great ride and still doing well. And obviously, we've made a go of this.
Yeah. Do you ever regret the change?
For instance, yesterday, since I was struggling with putting new lacing on these belts on the harvester, and spent 8.5 hours doing that, on my knees and trying to figure out how to make this work, and things weren't all going that well. Those days, I think the biggest thing is I had people.
Yeah.
I had 120 employees. I had PhDs. I had, back then we had secretaries. I can't even call them that anymore. I mean, I had a lot of support. I had engineers. So, I was still very active in the technology and the research, and I had a great research department. And today, not only don't have people, but even the critical labor force isn't available. So that part today is definitely putting a lot of strain on the situation, and it's across the board.
Yeah,
it's across the board in nationwide.
Yeah,
in agriculture and other things. I just had a talk with Earl ran into John and Wagner and his wife, and the first thing he asked is, "How's your staffing? How's your?" Because everybody's got the same problem.
Yep, we do. Are there any final words you'd like to share, Jeff?
Well, I enjoy working with you,
and
we've, I still remember the first day meeting your dad,
Yep.
I think your mom was with him too.
Yep.
And then obviously as time went on, I got a kick out of her telling me the story, how she was reading the paper and trying to figure out how she could kind of convince her husband to, who was, type A, as she told me, and to settle down and do something a little different. And she saw an ad. She's in California. I think she was either on a plane, it might have been, or at home, and found an ad for a winery back in upstate New York, which she's from.
Yep.
And so bingo bango, next thing you know, the first your brother came and then you came, and it's the people are good. I enjoy the people I work with, and it's satisfying in the end of the day to have deliver quality fruit and then also drink the end result, quality wine. So that part of it, is continued to be very satisfying.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down with us, Jeff. I'm going to close this out.
Sounds good.
So this has been Jeff Moriss with Glenora Farms. You can taste some of the wines we make specifically from his vineyard. I tend to label those as Moriss Vineyard, and we do a great Riesling that expresses the terroir here in the Finger Lakes. Jeff has lived an interesting life, going from different careers and finding his roots in farming fine wine grapes here in the Finger Lakes. Thanks for joining us for this special In the Vineyard episode, and we look forward to joining you next week, where we'll be talking with Ernie Lowson of Dr. Lowson. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed this show. This has been Viticulture, where we share ways to cultivate a good life. Don't forget to visit our website at viticulturepodcast.com. Subscribe to our Substack, where you'll get show notes, transcripts, musings, and exclusive offers. And check us out on all the major social media platforms. Thanks again for stopping by.